Hand it over. I'm not letting you film us kicking you out of first class." The flight attendant smashed her camera on the floor while the black girl just stared, holding back tears. No apology, just cold silence from everyone watching. But she didn't beg. She said quietly, "I'll call my father." Who was he? And why did those words make them panic? Want to know what happened next? Hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what would you do if you saw this? Let's talk about it. Zara Bennett adjusted the strap of her camera bag as she walked through the polished floors of the airport, feeling the low hum of distant conversations and rolling luggage all around her. She was barely 18, with eyes full of possibility, freshly accepted into a university abroad. Today was supposed to be the day she celebrated everything she'd worked for. The first-class ticket in her hand was a gift from her father, his way of saying he was proud of her. But there was something about the way the terminal staff eyed her that made her stomach tighten. She tried to ignore it, telling herself she was overthinking things, even as she caught the security guard glancing at her badge twice. When she finally reached the boarding line, Claudia Harper was stationed at the front with a perfect corporate smile that seemed stuck to her face. Next, Claudia called, her voice bright and hollow at once. Zara handed over her boarding pass with a hopeful smile. Claudia took it with mechanical efficiency, but her eyes flickered over Zara's face with something less polite. For a moment, there was silence. Then Claudia's smile stiffened further. "First class, huh?" she asked, her tone light but laced with a sharp edge. Zara blinked, nodding slowly. "Yes, ma'am," she replied. Claudia tilted her head. "Sure you're in the right line?" She didn't lower her voice. Passengers behind Zara shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. Zara forced a smile. "It's the right ticket." Claudia didn't budge. She flipped the boarding pass over, inspecting it like it was fake currency. "First class is very exclusive," she added, emphasizing the words. "You know that, right?" Zara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she refused to be baited. "I know," she said evenly. "That's why I bought the ticket." Claudia gave her a slow blink. "You bought it." She said it with clear skepticism, like it was the most unlikely thing she'd ever heard. The words were loud enough that the suited man behind Zara cleared his throat in embarrassment on her behalf. Zara bit back the tremor in her voice. "Yes," she repeated. Claudia exhaled sharply through her nose, smiled, tight, fake, and scanned the ticket with a beep that sounded accusatory in the sudden hush. "All right," she said, but didn't move aside. Instead, she added, "Just be aware, you'll need to keep your area clean. We have higher standards in first class." The words were syrupy sweet, but her eyes were cold steel. Zara blinked. It wasn't just rude, it was humiliating. She could feel the eyes of everyone behind her, their expressions flickering between pity and polite curiosity. She swallowed hard. "Thank you for letting me know," she said as levelly as she could. Claudia's eyes twinkled like she'd won something. "No problem. Enjoy your flight," she said in that same mocking voice as she finally moved aside. Zara tried to step past quickly, but not before Claudia's voice carried after her, just loud enough for her to hear. First class is getting too accessible these days. Another flight attendant standing next to Claudia stifled a laugh. Zara felt her spine straighten reflexively. She didn't turn around, didn't answer. She just kept walking, her fingers tightening around the strap of her camera bag like it was a lifeline. She wanted to shake it off, to tell herself she was imagining things, that maybe Claudia was just having a bad day. But she knew better. She'd seen that look before, the smirk, the tight smile, the disbelief that someone like her could possibly belong in first class. She reached the boarding ramp and forced herself to slow down. She was determined not to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flustered. As she approached the plane door, the flight attendant there was friendlier but distracted, ushering people aboard quickly. She stepped into the cool, pressurized air of the cabin and found her seat, 1A, the very front. She was determined to claim it without apology. Settling in, she pulled out her camera and held it in her lap. It was a cherished possession, a gift from her father when she'd won her first photography competition. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. But as she adjusted the seatbelt, She caught a glimpse of Claudia talking to another attendant at the galley entrance, glancing toward Zara's seat with a sneer. Claudia whispered something that made the other attendant bite her lip in amusement before they both looked away quickly when Zara met their eyes. Zara turned back to the window, heart hammering. She had been so excited for this moment, a celebration of everything she'd worked for. Now it felt tainted, but she wouldn't show them that. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She closed her eyes and remembered her father's words. Dignity is something they can't take from you unless you give it to them. She inhaled deeply, willing herself to remember that. As she opened her eyes, the plane was filling up. She watched the other passengers being helped to their seats with practiced courtesy, the older man with the expensive watch getting help with his coat, the white couple with a baby being fussed over with extra pillows and blankets. And then there was her, sitting alone, with Claudia pointedly ignoring her, only checking on passengers in the surrounding rows. Claudia's voice carried occasionally with professional warmth. "Can I get you anything, sir?" "Champagne, ma'am." But not for Zara. She felt the isolation prick her skin like needles. And yet she sat up straighter. She picked up her camera, checked the settings like she always did before a big shoot, even though she had nowhere to photograph right now. It was something to do, something that made her feel in control. She refused to be small, but deep down, there was a flicker of anger that she couldn't quite contain. A small voice in her head whispered, "They're not going to get away with this." And in that moment, even she didn't know just how right she was. Zara sat in her first class seat trying to focus on anything but the prickle of Claudia's stare from the galley door, clutching her camera like it could shield her from the world. But she couldn't ignore the whispering around her, the shifting of polished shoes on the plush carpet as other passengers eyed her with a mixture of discomfort and thinly veiled curiosity. She felt every second stretch like a punishment she hadn't earned. Then the cabin door clicked shut with a soft, final thud. And Claudia, now finished helping a white couple settle their coats, swept down the aisle with the grace of someone who believed the plane was her private kingdom. She stopped beside Zara's seat with the same corporate smile that didn't reach her eyes and said in a voice pitched to carry, "Miss, I'll need to see that boarding pass again." Zara blinked, surprised but determined to stay calm. She pulled it out and handed it over, her hand steady despite the roaring in her ears. Claudia didn't just glance at it. She held it up like a counterfeit bill at a bank, twisting it under the cabin light with exaggerated suspicion. Then she let out a theatrical sigh. "This says first class, but I don't think that's right," she said loudly enough for 3 rows to turn their heads. The older businessman with the newspaper lowered it just enough to watch. The young mother with the baby shifted uncomfortably. Zara's throat tightened, but she kept her voice calm. "That's my seat." Claudia's eyes narrowed. "Or so you say," she replied, drawing out the words as though Zara was a liar in court. The hush in the cabin was suffocating. Zara glanced at the watching passengers, hoping someone would say something. But no one did. Claudia continued, "You know it's a federal offense to lie about a boarding pass." Her voice took on a faux police authority. Zara swallowed hard. "I'm not lying," she said softly but firmly. Claudia leaned closer, her tone like poison wrapped in sugar. "If you keep this up, I'll have to call security," she announced with relish, the words making the nearest rows go pin-drop silent. A murmur broke out somewhere in the back, but no one actually spoke up. Zara could feel her face burning, not just from anger, but from the raw sting of humiliation. She met Claudia's gaze and said carefully, "Please check your system. It will confirm my seat." Claudia's smile thinned even further. "Oh, I will," she promised coldly. "But in the meantime, you'll need to stand up." Zara stiffened. "I'm not moving," she said, her voice cracking just slightly despite her best effort to stay firm. Claudia raised an eyebrow like she was dealing with a petulant child. "Don't make this worse for yourself," she said loudly. For everyone to hear, Zara looked around again. Some people looked away guiltily. Others watched like it was entertainment. No one moved to help. Her hands tightened around the camera in her lap, so hard her knuckles whitened. Claudia gave a tight nod as if proving a point to the audience. "Last chance to cooperate," she said crisply. Zara drew in a breath, trying to remember her father's words about dignity. "I have nothing to cooperate with," she said as evenly as she could, her voice shaking. But unbroken, Claudia's expression shifted from fake patience to open scorn. "Very well," she said loudly enough to ensure no one could claim they didn't hear. "I'll get security to remove you." She snapped her fingers toward the younger flight attendant standing further down the aisle, who jumped and hurried forward, looking anywhere but at Zara's eyes. Claudia's voice cracked like a whip. "Call for airport security immediately." The attendant hesitated, but then scurried off. Passengers murmured. The hush filled with buzzing curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. Zara could feel every eye on her. Her chest heaved once, but she forced it down, telling herself not to cry. Not here, not for them. Claudia turned back to her with a victorious gleam. "You see? It doesn't have to be like this," she said sweetly but loudly. "We try to be understanding with passengers who make honest mistakes, but dishonesty is something we take very seriously." She made sure to emphasize dishonesty, stabbing the word like a dagger. Zara clenched her teeth so hard her jaw hurt. The cabin had gone so quiet that the rustle of paper from the businessman's newspaper seemed deafening. Someone coughed awkwardly. The mother with the baby bounced it nervously on her lap. Refusing to meet Zara's gaze, Claudia straightened, adjusting her uniform with smug precision, and gave the entire cabin an apologetic smile that wasn't sorry at all. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience while we handle this matter," she said in her best airline PA voice. Some people nodded politely, complicit in their silence. Others looked away, pretending to be busy, as if her humiliation wasn't happening 3 feet in front of them. Zara felt her vision blur for a moment. But she blinked the tears back violently. She wouldn't let them see her break. Claudia's attention returned to her like a hawk circling prey. "Still refusing to move?" she asked, softer now, but crueler for it. Zara's voice scraped out hoarse. "This is my seat," she repeated. Claudia smirked. "We'll see what security says about that." She turned on her heel, striding down the aisle with the air of someone who just delivered justice. The young flight attendant returned breathlessly. Whispering something, Claudia nodded sharply, then gestured imperiously toward the front of the plane. "Escort her out if necessary," she ordered, loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. Zara felt the world spin a little, her fingers still wrapped around her camera, the only thing keeping her anchored. She forced herself to breathe, slowly, carefully. Even as her heart thundered so loudly she thought it might break her ribs, she didn't move, she wouldn't move. And the attendant, face pale, hesitated. Claudia's voice rose again, shrill with triumph. "I said now," she snapped, and the cabin erupted in whispers. The businessman lowered his paper all the way, watching with open curiosity. The mother with the baby finally turned her face to the window. Zara's eyes darted around, searching desperately for anyone willing to speak up, to say this is wrong. But all she saw were cowards and voyeurs. Claudia crossed her arms, tapping her foot theatrically, as if counting the seconds until the police would arrive. She opened her mouth to add another cutting remark. But Zara inhaled slowly, straightened her back in a seat, and looked her square in the eyes with a calmness she didn't feel. Her voice low but clear. "Call whoever you want." She said, "I'm not moving." Claudia's lips twitched with fury barely restrained. The tension in the air crackled like a live wire. The whispers grew louder, the silence more damning. And for one impossible second, the entire plane seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see just how far this would go. Claudia's cold smile hadn't faded when the cabin door opened and a man in a Navy Airline supervisor jacket stepped in, his badge reading Operations Manager in gleaming silver. He walked with the casual authority of someone who solved problems for a living, but whose face hardened slightly as he saw Claudia's impatient tapping and the tense hush in the cabin. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked loudly, pitching his voice to command silence. Claudia straightened, putting on her most professional face. "This passenger is refusing to comply with my instructions," she said primly, tilting her head at Zara like she was pointing out litter on the floor. The manager's eyes flickered to Zara briefly, but didn't soften. He turned fully to Claudia. "Refusing how?" Claudia didn't hesitate. "She's in a seat she didn't pay for, and she's making a scene about it." Her voice was cold and efficient, a surgeon's scalpel cutting away nuance. The man didn't even glance at Zara's boarding pass sitting there in her trembling fingers. Instead, he gave Claudia a curt nod. "Understood," he said before facing the rest of the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry for the inconvenience. We'll handle this quickly." There was a smattering of relieved nods and polite smiles from passengers eager for the drama to end. Zara felt her mouth go dry as the manager turned to her at last. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step off the plane so we can resolve this matter," he said in a rehearsed calm that didn't hide the finality in his tone. Zara's voice cracked as she tried. "Sir, please, this is my seat." She held up the boarding pass, her fingers shaking. The manager didn't even glance at it. "You can show me that." "Outside," he said with a forced smile, the lie in his promise obvious to them both. Claudia folded her arms in satisfaction, the younger flight attendant behind her looking at the floor as if it might open up and swallow her. The businessman in the nearby seat cleared his throat like he might say something, but then he adjusted his tie and turned away, checking his watch pointedly. The mother with the baby shushed it gently, eyes fixed on the window, refusing to see anything. Zara swallowed hard, blinking back tears of rage and humiliation. "Why can't you check it here?" she demanded. Her voice a low growl now. The supervisor's smile froze, and he spoke more sharply. "Ma'am, you're disturbing the other passengers. Let's handle this outside." The words disturbing hung in the air like a brand, marking her as the problem, the dangerous one, even though she hadn't raised her voice until now. Claudia didn't even bother hiding her smirk as she moved back a step to give the supervisor space to escort her. Zara clutched her camera tighter to her chest, as if it could shield her from the weight of 100 eyes boring into her, judging, condemning, or worse, pitying her. The young flight attendant finally looked up, catching Zara's gaze with stricken eyes. She opened her mouth like she might protest, but Claudia shot her a look so sharp it shut her up before a word escaped. The supervisor shifted, clearly wanting to get this over with. "I'm not going to ask again," he said, quietly but firmly, reaching to touch Zara's shoulder in a show of gentle force that wasn't gentle at all. Zara recoiled instinctively, her voice ragged. "Don't touch me," she snapped. The entire cabin seemed to inhale as one. Claudia's eyebrows shot up theatrically. "See," she said loudly to no one in particular, aggressive, her tone dripping with triumph. The supervisor's face hardened further. He leaned in slightly, voice dropping to a hiss she could feel on her cheek. "You can come quietly, or I can call security to remove you." His fingers twitched near the radio on his belt, threatening the escalation without having to say it outright. Zara's throat burned with swallowed screams. She looked around desperately, scanning the silent cabin. But no one moved, no one even shifted. They were statues in tailored suits and designer dresses, pretending they weren't watching a trial with no judge, no jury, no defense. Her eyes stung, and she bit her lip until she tasted blood. Slowly, deliberately, she unclipped her seatbelt and stood, the boarding pass still clutched in one shaking hand, the camera in the other. The manager stepped back slightly as if she might explode. "Thank you," he said with patronizing relief. Claudia didn't even try to hide her smirk. She practically radiated smug victory. "Good call," she told him softly but audibly. The young attendant behind them watched in horrified silence, mouth pressed into a thin line. Zara moved stiffly down the aisle, her knees threatening to buckle, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her stumble. Passengers shrank back slightly as she passed, pulling in elbows, adjusting blankets, avoiding her eyes. Some actually whispered. The businessman cleared his throat again, rustling his paper importantly. The mother finally murmured shoo to her baby, as if the child had dared speak truth. At the cabin door, Claudia paused, blocking her path for just a heartbeat too long before stepping aside with a sarcastic little bow. "Have a lovely day," she said in a voice so dripping with mockery it made Zara's stomach turn. Outside the plane, the boarding bridge felt freezing despite the stuffy air. The noise of the airport beyond roared in her ears. The supervisor didn't say a word as he gestured for her to keep walking. She turned to him one last time, shaking so hard she thought she might drop the camera. "Please," she whispered, voice cracking. "Just look at the ticket." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "We'll sort this out at the gate," he repeated in the same bland voice, leading her back up the ramp toward the gate door. Passengers for economy lined the sides of the tunnel, staring openly at the disturbance being led away. Some whispered. Others took out phones to record. No one offered her so much as a word of comfort or a question of fairness. The gate agent looked up as they approached, eyes flicking from Zara to the supervisor and back with a mixture of dread and duty. "Problem?" she asked weakly. The supervisor didn't bother lowering his voice. "We have a non-compliant passenger," he said, the words tasting sour in Zara's ears. "We need to verify her seating before she can reboard." The gate agent nodded quickly, opening her mouth to say something conciliatory that died in her throat when Claudia appeared behind them, arms crossed, leaning in the doorway with her practiced airline smile frozen in place like a wax figure, watching, waiting, ready to ensure no kindness was offered. Zara's grip on her camera finally loosened. the strap slipping through sweaty fingers as her arm fell to her side. The gate area was half empty now that most first-class and priority passengers had boarded, but the handful of people remaining all turned to watch. The scene, their curiosity as sharp and bright as camera flashes. The boarding announcement droned overhead like a cruel joke. Now boarding all remaining first-class passengers. And she felt her gut twist as she realized they'd effectively blocked her from early boarding altogether, leaving her stranded in the echoing terminal, humiliated, broken, and utterly alone. The supervisor still wouldn't meet her eyes as he pointed her toward a chair against the wall. "Please wait here while we clear." "This up?" he said in a tone that closed the conversation as thoroughly as a slammed door. Zara sat slowly, the cold plastic digging into her spine, her camera resting in her lap like dead weight, her boarding pass crumpled in her fist, and the voices around her blurred into a dull roar as she tried desperately not to sob. Zara sat on the hard plastic chair in the corner of the boarding area, her fingers clenched around her camera like it was a life raft, the sounds of rolling suitcases and boarding announcements washing over her in cold, in different waves. She stared at her crumpled boarding pass with blurry eyes, blinking rapidly to keep the tears at bay. Her chest felt like it might cave in under the weight of humiliation. The supervisor stood a few feet away, pretending to type something urgent on his tablet. But really just avoiding her gaze, Claudia lingered closer, arms folded smugly, rocking on her heels with that same predatory calm. Every now and then she flicked her eyes toward Zara with a triumphant glint, as if savoring the victory she'd claimed by dragging her off the plane. When a final boarding call echoed overhead, Claudia's smile grew even sharper. The gate agent tried to look busy behind the desk, shuffling papers that didn't matter. Zara could feel the minutes slipping away, each second killing any chance she had of reboarding with dignity. Her father's voice in her head whispered, "Don't let them take your dignity." But it was so hard to hear over the pounding of her heart. Finally, taking a trembling breath, she drew herself up just enough to speak, voice shaking but determined. "Can you please just check the system?" she said, directing it at the supervisor. "My seat is there. My boarding pass is real." The supervisor didn't even lift his head, just waved a dismissive hand. "We'll get to it," he muttered. Claudia let out a sharp, mocking laugh that sliced through the silence. "Oh, she still thinks she belongs up there," she said, deliberately loud enough for the handful of other passengers waiting to hear. Zara's head snapped toward her, eyes flashing. "I paid for that seat," she said, voice cracking. "I have every right to be there." Claudia took a step forward, tilting her head like she was examining an insect. "Sure you do," she drawled, her voice dripping sarcasm. "That's why you're over here with us." Zara's breath hitched, but she refused to look away, gripping her camera tighter. Claudia's gaze dropped to it, narrowing slightly. "You filming all this?" she asked suddenly, her voice changing pitch. Taking on an edge of anger she hadn't bothered to hide before, Zara frowned in confusion. "No, she started, but Claudia was already lunging forward, her fingers wrapping around the camera strap and yanking it hard. Zara let out a startled cry as it slipped from her grip. Claudia ripped it away and held it aloft like evidence of a crime. "So you are filming us," she announced, her voice rising theatrically, ensuring everyone in earshot turned to stare. Zara's heart raced in panic. "I wasn't filming anything," she shouted, finally standing up fully, her chair scraping harshly on the tile. Claudia sneered. "Right, sure, just documenting your little meltdown so you can twist it online," she accused, holding the camera just out of reach as Zara lunged for it desperately. "Give it back," Zara cried, voice raw with panic. Claudia took a step back, grinning cruelly. "You know what? Let's make sure you can't smear our airline." And before Zara could react, Claudia slammed the camera down onto the hard floor with all her strength. The crack of plastic and glass shattering rang out through the terminal like a gunshot. The entire area went dead silent for half a second as Zara stared in horror. The camera, a gift from her father, the thing she'd saved so hard to buy lenses for, lay in pieces at her feet, shards of broken glass twinkling mockingly under the fluorescent lights. Zara felt like the floor had dropped away beneath her. She fell to her knees, fingers trembling as she reached for the destroyed body of it, voice catching on a sob she tried to swallow. Claudia's lip curled in disgust. "Oops," she said flatly. Zara's head snapped up, eyes blazing with unshed tears. "You had no right," she whispered, her voice shaking with rage. Claudia rolled her eyes. "Sure I did," she said. "You were filming without permission." Zara's voice cracked, I wasn't filming. Anything. You didn't even check. Claudia gave a one-shoulder shrug, completely unbothered. Don't really care, she said, her tone casual, dismissive. Zara felt the fury pulse so hard in her temples it was dizzying. I want your name, she spat, fighting for control. I'm reporting you. Claudia's eyebrows shot up, her mouth curling into a smirk. Oh, she asked sweetly, leaning in so close Zara could see the fine lines around her eyes. Good luck with that, she whispered, voice cold as ice. No one's going to care. The words hit Zara like a slap, her chest convulsing as the truth of it tried to choke her. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Claudia straightened, turning away like Zara wasn't worth another second, calling back over her shoulder. Security will be here any minute to remove you from the gate. So I suggest you start packing up your trash. The supervisor finally deigned to look up, frowning faintly at the broken camera, but saying nothing, just shifting his weight awkwardly, as if the entire scene was a minor inconvenience to his schedule. The other passengers who'd stopped to watch slowly peeled away, shaking their heads, some muttering under their breath about entitlement and causing a scene, not at Claudia, but at Zara, who knelt there on the dirty tile floor cradling the broken remains of her dream in her lap. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing the tears to stop. Her father's voice rang hollow in her ears now. Don't let them take your dignity. But how could she keep it when it was being stomped into the ground in front of an audience that didn't care? She finally forced herself to stand, legs shaking so badly she almost fell again, her hands smeared with dirt and tiny flecks of broken glass. She swiped them on her jeans, but they just felt wrong. Alien, Claudia watched with open satisfaction, lips curled in amusement as Zara tried to hold herself upright. Still want to make a complaint? She asked, voice saccharine. Feel free, honey, she added with mocking endearment. But don't expect anyone to take it seriously. The words felt like they were being carved into Zara's skin, each syllable leaving a welt. She sucked in a ragged breath, blinking so hard it hurt, finally managing to force words past the tightness in her throat. Your name, she demanded one more time, voice hoarse. Claudia pretended to think, tapping her lip theatrically. No, she said, smile growing wider. I don't think you need it. Zara let out a strangled noise halfway between a sob and a laugh of disbelief. Claudia's gaze was unblinking, triumphant, knowing she'd won this round. The supervisor finally cleared his throat awkwardly. All right, he said, voice flat, I think. That's enough. But he didn't say it to Claudia. He said it to Zara, gesturing dismissively toward the far end of the gate area, where security was finally approaching in dark uniforms, their radios crackling, their eyes scanning for the problem they'd been told to deal with. Zara stood frozen, with the remains of her broken camera digging into her palms as security approached, their dark uniforms and clipped steps radiating an authority that promised there would be no more discussion. The supervisor exhaled sharply and finally broke his useless silence, gesturing to her like she was an unruly child to be corralled. This way, ma'am. Let's not make this any worse, he said, voice all fake calm, but with a warning threaded through it. She swallowed hard and forced her legs to move, feeling every pair of eyes in the gate area burn into her back with curiosity or condemnation, or that cold indifference that was so much worse. She heard Claudia's voice behind her, quiet but sharp with smug satisfaction. Have a safe flight await, she added with a laugh that her co-worker couldn't quite hide his grimace at. But he didn't say a word in Zara's defense. The security officers flanked her on either side without touching her, one murmuring into his radio that they had the subject in custody. Her fingers trembled around the destroyed camera as she walked, shards of plastic biting her palms. Her chest felt so tight she could barely breathe, but she refused to give them tears. They led her down the wide hallway away from the gate, the echo of their boots like a funeral march. She glanced back once and saw Claudia smirking triumphantly in the doorway, the supervisor standing next to her with arms crossed, offering no apology, no second thoughts, nothing. When they reached the security desk just past the gate area, the older officer cleared his throat, giving Zara a look that wasn't exactly unkind, but absolutely exasperated. Ma'am, he began, voice slow and deliberate. You need to calm down so we can figure out what to do here. Zara's mouth dropped open in shock, words crashing in her throat. I am calm, she forced out, her voice raspy with swallowed rage. She destroyed my property, and no one's even looking at my ticket. The other officer lifted a brow, exchanging a glance with his partner that said, we've heard this before. He tapped on the desk where the boarding pass lay in a crumpled mess. We'll verify that in a moment. he said dismissively. "But we also got reports of you refusing to comply and threatening staff." The words hit her like another slap. "That's a lie," she said, voice rising, and the first officer's expression hardened. "Ma'am, yelling isn't helping you," he said in that patronizing tone that scraped her nerves raw. "I'm not yelling," she cried, voice breaking as she forced it lower again. The older officer held up a placating hand. "Listen, we're going to need to get statements," he said with a sigh, gesturing for her to sit. She sank onto the hard bench as her legs threatened to give out, fingers still wrapped around her ruined camera. Her heart thundered with impotent rage and fear. Meanwhile, back at the gate, Claudia leaned against the counter with an expression of bored victory, while the supervisor rubbed his forehead, as if he were the victim of this whole ordeal. He glanced at the young attendant who had watched the entire scene unfold. Her wide eyes filled with horror she was trying desperately to hide. "You," he snapped, making her jump. "I need you to help me write this up." She swallowed hard, voice tiny. "Write what up?" she asked. Genuinely confused, or maybe buying herself time, Claudia snorted. "The incident report," she said coolly, obviously. The supervisor shot her an irritated look, but didn't correct her. Instead, he turned back to the trembling attendant and fixed her with a hard stare. "We're going to need to document that the passenger was non-compliant," he said, choosing each word carefully. "Unruly, refused instructions, threatened staff." The words fell like stones into the silent space between them. The young woman opened her mouth as if to protest, eyes darting toward the security desk, where Zara sat cradling her destroyed camera. But Claudia cut in before she could speak, her voice saccharine and cruel. "We can't have passengers thinking they can just film staff and make us look bad, can we?" she said with theatrical concern. The supervisor's eyes flickered uneasily, but he nodded curtly. "Exactly," he muttered. "This is about protecting the airline's reputation." He turned to the CCTV terminal beside the gate counter, fingers tapping with a nervous energy that belied his words. The young attendant swallowed hard, voice trembling. "But the cameras," she started, voice so low they almost didn't hear her. Claudia's gaze snapped to her, all pretense dropping. "What about them?" she asked icily. The attendant shrank back slightly. "They'll show she didn't do anything," she mumbled. Claudia's smile was slow and terrible. "That's the beauty of it," she said quietly. "We control the footage." She turned to the supervisor. "Right?" He hesitated only a heartbeat before exhaling sharply. "Delete it," he muttered, the words leaving a sour taste even in his own mouth. "We'll say there was a malfunction, system error." Claudia's grin widened as she clapped her hands once satisfied. "Perfect," she purred. The young attendant's eyes filled with tears. She blinked away furiously. "But that's," she tried again, voice cracking. Claudia didn't even let her finish. "Do you want to keep this job?" she asked softly, but with steel in every syllable. The girl fell silent, pressing her lips together until they went white. The supervisor rubbed his face again, looking older by the second, but he still moved to the terminal, fingers typing commands, screens flickering as he navigated through menus until he found the file for the gate's camera feed. He hesitated again, jaw tight. Claudia leaned over his shoulder, her breath cold on his ear. "Do it," she whispered. And with one last exhale, he selected the footage and hit delete, the confirmation prompt popping up like a taunt before he clicked yes. The screen blinked once and was empty, the evidence erased like it had never existed. The young attendant let out a small choked sound she tried to hide with her hand. Claudia straightened, smoothing her uniform with satisfaction. "Now," she said briskly, "about that report." She snapped her fingers, drawing the girl's flinch. "Write it up," she ordered. Passenger was combative, refused to comply, endangered boarding procedures, threatened to sue, you know the usual. The supervisor's fingers were already flying across the keyboard, the words appearing in black and white with a finality that made the attendant sick to her stomach. She tried one last time, voice barely a whisper. But she wasn't like that. Claudia turned slowly, her expression a mask of polite fury. She said flatly, "because we say she was." Her voice dropped lower, lethal. "And if you can't get with the program, there are plenty of people who want your job." The girl swallowed hard, her shoulders shaking as she finally nodded. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered. Claudia's smile returned, cold and victorious, as she patted the girl's shoulder mockingly. "Good team player," she said before turning away to adjust her scarf in the reflection of the blank CCTV screen. The supervisor finally finished typing, hitting print as the printer hummed to life, spitting out the lie in crisp black ink. The words "incident report" bold across the top, sealing Zara's fate with every keystroke they'd entered without a second thought. Zara sat slumped in the corner of the security checkpoint just outside the gate, her broken camera in pieces on her lap, the boarding pass now crumpled and sweaty in her trembling fingers. She kept her eyes locked on the floor because every time she looked up she saw passengers stealing glances her way, some with open curiosity, some with pity, and some with that unmistakable gleam of vindication that made her stomach turn. She heard them whispering in low voices that carried all the same. "Is that her?" one woman asked behind a manicured hand. The one who was screaming on the plane, a man in a sports jacket, snorted softly. "Classic troublemaker," he muttered to his companion, voice dripping with smug certainty. Another passenger held up their phone, the screen reflecting Zara's bowed head. She heard the telltale sound of a camera shutter. Her skin crawled with the violation of it. Poor thing's crying. Someone else laughed quietly, not with empathy, but with the nasty delight of someone collecting gossip to share over drinks. "She's hysterical," a younger man said, tapping at his screen. "This is gonna blow up if I post it." Zara jerked her head up at that, eyes wide and wet. The man didn't even flinch, just kept recording, tilting his phone slightly to get her tear-streaked face in frame. She wanted to scream at him to stop, but her voice wouldn't come out. It felt trapped in her throat like broken glass. The security guard posted beside her gave her a quick glance, sighed and looked away again, clearly not about to intervene. She sucked in a ragged breath and forced herself to look away from the phone's unblinking eye, pressing her fingers into her palms so hard her nails dug crescent moons into the skin somewhere behind her. She heard the boarding door shut with a final, sealing thud. The plane she was supposed to be on, was leaving without her, her seat empty, all because Claudia and the supervisor had decided she didn't belong there. She let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob, and that too was recorded. A woman with perfectly styled hair sked loudly from a row of seats a few feet away. "This is what happens when people think rules don't apply to them," she said, her voice pitched to carry. Her friend nodded solemnly. "Honestly," she added, "if she can't follow directions, she shouldn't be flying first class." Zara's vision blurred at the injustice of it, the utter wrongness. She wanted to stand and shout the truth at them all, to throw the broken camera in their smug faces and make them see, but she couldn't move. She was paralyzed with shame and rage and exhaustion. The security guard's radio crackled, and he moved a few steps away, talking quietly with someone out of earshot, leaving her even more alone. She hunched over her lap, shoulders shaking as another wave of tears threatened to escape. In the back of her mind, she heard her father's voice, calm and steady. "Don't let them take your dignity." But it felt too late, like they'd taken everything. Even that. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, but it didn't help. Just smeared the wetness across her cheek. The smell of cold airport air and coffee and jet fuel filled her nose, suffocating in its normalcy. How could the world just go on around her like this wasn't happening? More passengers began to drift toward the area, late boarders and people checking gate. Numbers they paused saw her, and the whispers began anew. A man in a business suit shook his head. "Unbelievable," he muttered as he passed. Another snapped a photo quickly before she could even react. She wanted to slap the phone from his hands, but her limbs felt like lead. She let out a shuddering breath, eyes fixed on the floor, her thoughts spinning wildly. "I don't deserve this," she told herself. "I didn't do anything." But the words sounded hollow, like lies told to comfort a child. In the middle of it all, she heard Claudia's voice clear as day behind her in her memory. That cold, mocking laugh. "No one's going to care." The words twisted like a knife in her gut. She sniffed hard, swallowing the cry that threatened to rise in her throat. Her vision clouded with unshed tears. She forced herself to think, to find something, anything to hold on to. Her father's face flashed in her mind, kind eyes and warm smile. His steady voice telling her to never let anyone make her small. Her lips trembled, but she pressed them together hard enough to hurt. She wiped her eyes again, leaving streaks on her face, but refusing to care. Finally, voice cracking so softly it was almost lost under the roar of the terminal, she whispered, "I'll call my father." The words escaped like a broken prayer, fragile and full of desperate hope. But even that tiny ember was immediately stomped out as a man sitting nearby heard her and laughed derisively. "Oh, please," he scoffed, not bothering to lower his voice. "Daddy gonna come save you?" Another woman snorted beside him. "She's delusional," she said, checking her phone for new messages. Zara's breath stuttered in her chest, the cruel laughter a slap. She couldn't dodge, The man added with a mocking sing-song. "Better call him fast before your flight leave again." He snickered at his own joke. Zara's fingers tightened around the broken camera in her lap, the plastic biting her palm. She felt her lips tremble, but she bit them so hard she tasted blood. She didn't want to cry again. Not here, not in front of them. But the tears burned behind her eyes like acid. One traitorous drop slipped down her cheek anyway. Her humiliation complete. The security guard returned to stand near her, but didn't say anything. Just folded his arms and sighed like she was a burden he couldn't wait to get rid of. The passengers kept coming, kept gawking. The whispers growing bold. Their phones ready to immortalize her shame with every shuddering breath she took. Somewhere in the terminal a baby wailed, and the sound seemed to echo her own internal scream. But no one noticed. No one cared. The announcements droned on cheerfully overhead, calling for other flights, other people with other lives that hadn't crashed and burned at Gate 12. She sat there, the lone spectacle for their collective judgment, feeling smaller and smaller with every passing second as they watched her break and did nothing but smile at the show. Zara sat hunched over on the cold airport bench, her fingers raw and shaking as they clutched the fractured remains of her camera. The whispers around her felt like a dull roar in her skull, each mocking voice replaying Claudia's sneer and the supervisor's bored indifference. She sucked in a shaky breath, wiped her cheeks with the back of her sleeve, smearing tears into angry red blotches on her skin. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Call me if anything happens." It had sounded so gentle, then so comforting. Now it felt like the only thread she had left. She inhaled hard, trying to calm her tremors as she dug through her backpack for her phone. Her fingers closed around it like a lifeline and she pulled out, nearly dropping it because she was shaking so badly. The screen lit up and reflected her blotchy, tear-streaked face back at her like an accusation. The security guard shifted nearby, rolling his eyes slightly as he watched her. "You need to stay seated," he reminded her. Flatly, Zara ignored him. Her thumb hovered over the contact labeled simply Dad. Her breath hitched as she tapped it, pressing the phone to her ear. The first ring felt like an eternity. The second felt worse. By the third, her vision blurred again, with panic that he wouldn't answer. But then there was the soft click of the line connecting and her father's voice, warm and deep and instantly alert. "Zara?" he asked, concern threading through the single syllable like steel. Her mouth opened and nothing came out for a second, just a hiccup of air that rattled in her chest. Finally, she forced words past the tightness in her throat. "Daddy," she whispered, the single word so small, so raw it hurt to say. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "What happened?" "Where are you?" he demanded instantly. She choked on a sob she tried to hold back. They kicked me off," she managed, voice cracking painfully. "They said I didn't belong. They broke my camera. They won't let me on." The words tumbled out in a rush, breathless and ragged. There was silence on the line for the barest second, the kind of silence that felt like a held breath before a storm breaks. When he spoke again, his voice was even, but so cold she almost shivered. "Who is they exactly?" he asked. She squeezed her eyes shut, feeling the hot tears escape despite herself. "The attendant, Claudia. She said I didn't belong in first class. She grabbed my camera. She smashed it." Her voice cracked again. "They called security. They made me leave. No one would even look at my ticket." The guard standing near her cleared his throat uncomfortably, clearly hearing every word, but not daring to interrupt. On the other end of a line, her father's breathing was measured, controlled. "Okay," he said finally, voice clipped. "Listen to me carefully. Where are you exactly?" "Which gate?" She gulped air like she was drowning, blinking hard. "Gate 12, she whispered. "I'm outside the security desk." He didn't pause. "Stay there," he ordered, voice like iron wrapped in velvet. "Don't move." "I'm gonna fix this right now." She let out a strangled breath. "Daddy, they're laughing at me," she whispered, voice so small she hated herself for it. There was a sound on the line like a chair scraping across a floor. "They won't be for long," he said, the words so calm they were terrifying. "Stay on the phone with me." She nodded even though he couldn't see it, sniffing hard, trying to compose herself even as her shoulders shook. She heard him speaking to someone else in the background, his voice low and commanding, giving orders she couldn't make out. The security guard next to her shifted uncomfortably, eyeing the phone. "Ma'am," he started, his tone wary now. "I need you to calm down." She didn't even look at him, just clutched the phone tighter, feeling the familiar comfort of her father's voice, even cold and furious as it was. Finally, he spoke again. "They're gonna come get you," he said, "and you're going to get back on that plane." Her heart stuttered. "They won't let me." She choked. "They will," he said simply, brooking no argument. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she believed him. Even as the security guard opened his mouth to protest, his radio crackled to life with a burst of static and a sharp, urgent voice. "Dispatch, Gate 12, hold the passenger there." The guard frowned, pressing the button. "Say again." The voice came back clearer this time. "Hold her there." "CEO's orders." "Do not move her." The guard's eyes widened, flicking to Zara with new, nervous respect. "What the?" he muttered, pulling the radio to his mouth again but hesitating, the color draining from his face as the words sank in. Across the terminal, the gate desk phone began to ring insistently. The young attendant behind the counter jumped and fumbled to answer it, her voice squeaking as she greeted whoever was on the line, her eyes going round as saucers almost immediately. "Yes, sir," she squeaked, glancing at Claudia, who was still leaning smugly against the counter. Claudia raised an eyebrow, annoyed. Mouthing what? At her. The attendant swallowed hard, covering the receiver with her hand. "It's corporate," she whispered, voice quivering. Claudia rolled her eyes and snatched the phone from her. "This is Claudia," she said, her voice dripping with fake professionalism. There was a pause, and then the blood drained from her face so fast she looked like a wax statue. "Yes, sir. No, sir, I understand," she stammered, all the arrogance gone, her voice shaking. She tried to recover, straightening her uniform. With a trembling hand, "Of course, sir, immediately." She hung up with shaking fingers and didn't meet the young attendant's wide eyes. Instead, she turned sharply, scanning the terminal until she spotted Zara across the floor, her mouth a tight line. She marched over stiffly, trying to regain her composure, her heels clicking like gunshots against the polished floor. She stopped in front of Zara, swallowing visibly before speaking. "Miss Bennett," she ground out, voice so brittle it could snap. Zara looked up, blinking through tears, her father's voice still steady in her ear, telling her not to move. Claudia's lips twitched. "You'll be boarding the next available flight in first class," she said, the words clearly acid on her tongue. I'll be personally escorting you," she added, each syllable like it hurt to say. Zara blinked in disbelief, her breath hitching. Claudia's nostrils flared as she forced herself to add, "And I apologize for the misunderstanding." The words were stiff and robotic, nothing like the mocking laughter from before. The security guard shifted, glancing between them with the wide-eyed shock of someone realizing he'd picked the wrong side of a fight. The entire terminal seemed to hush, passengers nearby falling silent as they watched the scene, their earlier whispers dying in their throats as Claudia's voice cracked slightly on the word apologize. Her fingers clenched at her sides so hard they went white. Claudia swallowed hard as the words she'd just forced out, "I apologize for the misunderstanding," seemed to hang in the air like poisonous smoke. Her face rigid with fury she could no longer hide. Zara blinked at her, lips parted in raw disbelief, tears still wet on her cheeks. The silence around them was so complete it felt like the entire terminal was holding its breath. Passengers who'd been gleefully recording her breakdown now froze with their phones lowered, their faces shifting from smug entertainment to something closer to unease. The security guard who had been looming over Zara suddenly straightened, looking anywhere but at her, his radio buzzing with the same frantic dispatch voice repeating, "Hold her there, corporate's en route." Claudia's eyes darted around, as if seeking an exit, her perfect hair slightly mussed now, her fingers twitching like she wanted to slap the words back into her mouth. Zara felt her breath rattle in her chest as she tried to comprehend it. The phone still pressed to her ear, her father's voice steady as a metronome. "Stay where you are." "I'm coming," he said, the words calm and absolute in a way that settled something deep in her chest. Even as her hands shook, Claudia tried to recover, clearing her throat and straightening her uniform like she could with the old confidence back. She glanced over her shoulder at the gate desk, where the young attendant was still staring in open shock, the printer humming quietly with the false incident report still half finished, the pages curling with every lie they typed. The supervisor had gone pale, tapping frantically at the terminal like he could undo the footage he'd deleted if he just typed fast enough. The terminal around them buzzed with a new energy now, a current of rumor spreading like wildfire. "Did you hear? Corporate's involved. That's the CEO's daughter." "Wait, what?" Zara sniffed hard, forcing her spine to straighten. She wiped at her face with her sleeve, smearing mascara into tired bruises beneath her eyes. But she refused to look away from Claudia's face, refused to lower her gaze. Claudia swallowed again, voice cracking as she tried to maintain the brittle veneer of authority. escort you to the next available first-class seat," she repeated, quieter now, the apology a bitter pill. Stuck in her throat, the security guard gave Zara a wide berth, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Ma'am, can I help you with your bag?" he offered, voice suddenly polite. Too polite. Zara shook her head once, too proud to accept it. She felt raw, hollowed out by shame and rage. But beneath that was something hard and unbreakable, something that had survived every insult and shove today. She pulled her broken camera closer, the jagged plastic cutting into her fingers, but she welcomed the pain. It made her feel real. She lifted her chin, fixing Claudia with a stare that was glassy but unflinching. "Let's go then," she said, voice hoarse but steady. Claudia hesitated before turning stiffly, gesturing toward the boarding door with a rigid hand. "This way," she muttered. The walk back toward the jet bridge felt like a parade, every eye in the terminal following them, some whispering with new fear, others wide-eyed with dawning understanding. Zara kept her head high, even as her heart hammered in her ribs. Her father's voice had gone quiet in her ear, but she could still feel the strength in it like an echo. At the jet bridge door, the young attendant nearly knocked over the portable stanchion, scrambling to get out of the way. Sorry," she squeaked. Claudia ignored her, her face locked in a rictus of forced calm. She pushed the door open with too much force, the metal banging against the stop, and gestured for Zara to enter first. Zara did, the cool air of the jet bridge washing over her face, drying the tear tracks to tight salt lines on her skin. She gripped her camera so hard her fingers ached. Behind them, the security guard hovered like he wanted to disappear. Claudia cleared her throat and tried to adopt that professional tone again. "Will be personally ensuring you're comfortable," she managed, voice shaking. They reached the midpoint of the jet bridge before they heard the sound of hurried footsteps approaching from the other end, the dull thud of polished shoes striking the metal floor with purpose. Claudia's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing with confusion, then widening in horror as the figure came into view. He was tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that looked carved from the same stone as his. Expression, Zara's father closed the distance in long strides. His eyes locked onto his daughter's face. They softened fractionally when he saw her, her lip trembling despite herself. She let out a tiny choking sound and dropped the ruined camera as she rushed forward. He didn't hesitate. He opened his arms and caught her in a crushing embrace, pulling her against his chest with one hand cupping the back of her head, shielding her from the world. Claudia stumbled back half a step, eyes darting around wildly as the security guard suddenly found something very interesting on his boots. "Daddy," Zara gasped against his chest, voice muffled by the fabric of his suit. He didn't say anything for a second, just held her like he could put her back together with sheer will. Then he lifted his head slowly, eyes landing on Claudia like crosshairs. His jaw flexed once before he spoke, voice calm and deep enough to make the walls vibrate. "Claudia Harper," he said, the words delivered with the certainty of someone reading a verdict. Claudia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted to the badge on his suit pocket, where the airline's crest was embossed in gold. Beneath it, the words "Board Chairman" glinted like a slap to the face. Her skin went pale. "S, sir," she stammered, voice cracking. "I didn't." But he didn't even spare her a second glance as he turned his attention to Zara again, brushing a thumb over her damp cheek with a tenderness that seemed to make Claudia physically recoil. "You're coming with me," he said softly to Zara, ignoring everyone else like they weren't even there. Claudia's mouth worked soundlessly, her fingers twitching at her sides as the truth finally clicked in her eyes. That she hadn't just harassed some nobody. That she hadn't just smashed some girl's camera. She had humiliated the owner's daughter in front of an entire flight. The security guard let out a slow exhale, his radio crackling uselessly at his side. The terminal beyond the glass was suddenly alive with people pressing closer to watch through the windows, their faces a mix of confusion and dawning horror. Zara let out a shuddering breath, pressing her face into her father's chest one last time before pulling back enough to meet his eyes. Her voice wobbled, but was stronger than it had been all day. "I want to go home," she whispered, and he nodded once, never breaking eye contact. Then finally, and only then, did he turn to face Claudia directly, his gaze so cold it made her shiver despite the heat of the enclosed jet bridge. Zara's father held her close for a moment longer, his broad hand resting protectively on her shoulder, his gaze never wavering from Claudia, who seemed to shrink an inch with every breath she took. Her lips parted in a silent plea she didn't dare voice. Her eyes darted to the security guard who wouldn't meet her gaze, then to the young attendant standing frozen at the gate door, pale as paper. The father's voice cut through the thick silence like a blade, calm but so unyielding it left no room. "For argument, Ms. Harper," he began, enunciating each syllable like he was etching it into stone. "You will hand over your badge now." Claudia's jaw worked uselessly for a second before she croaked out, "Sir, please, I was following procedure." He raised a single hand, and the words died in her throat. "You destroyed my daughter's property. You humiliated her in front of a plane full of passengers, and you lied to cover it up." His voice didn't rise, but each accusation landed like a hammer blow. Claudia swallowed hard, her eyes shining with tears now, the arrogance drained from her features, leaving behind nothing but pale, clammy dread. "Badge," he repeated, this time with enough force that even the security guard jumped slightly. Claudia's trembling fingers rose to the lanyard at her neck, fumbling with the clasp, the plastic ID card rattling as she pulled it off. She held it out like it might bite her hand shaking so badly it quivered in the stale jet bridge air. He didn't even look at it as he took it from her fingers and handed it to the security guard. "Escort her out," he said simply. The guard cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of authority as he took Claudia's arm with a grip that was firm but not rough. She let out a pathetic whimper as he guided her toward the door. Zara watched through damp lashes as Claudia stumbled slightly, her perfect bun sagging, eyes darting wildly over the gathered passengers who pressed against the windows to see. The rumors, spreading like fire in dry grass, the hush in the terminal beyond was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional gasp or the click of a phone camera capturing every humiliating step. As Claudia was led away, the father's eyes shifted to the supervisor, who had watched the entire exchange with the expression of a man awaiting his own execution. His lips trembled as he tried to speak. "Mr. Bennett, I can explain." But Zara's father raised a single eyebrow. "Explain," he repeated, voice flat and deadly. "You falsified an incident report, deleted security footage, and allowed your staff to degrade my daughter without once verifying the truth." The supervisor paled further, sweat beading at his temples despite the chill of the jet bridge. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out but a choked sound. Mr. Bennett didn't bother to wait. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his own ID, this one gleaming with authority. The airline's logo emblazoned beside the words "Board Chairman." He held it up like a verdict. "You're done here," he said evenly, effective immediately. The supervisor's mouth fell open, his knees visibly buckling as he sagged back against the jet bridge wall. "Security, Mr. Bennett said, voice so calm it was terrifying. "Please remove him as well." The second guard, who had been standing uselessly, sprang forward, grabbing the supervisor by the arm. The man didn't even resist, his eyes glassy with shock as he was led away stumbling. Zara watched with her lips pressed together so hard they turned white, her chest heaving with the effort of breathing as relief and vindication tangled painfully inside her. Her father glanced at her once, his gaze softening a fraction. Then he turned back to the jet bridge door, the young attendant still standing there gaping like statue. "Go," he told her, voice clipped but not cruel. "Tell the captain we'll be boarding soon." She flinched at being spoken to, but nodded jerkily, scurrying down the bridge with her clipboard clutched to her chest. The security guards herding Claudia and the supervisor ahead of her like sheep marked for slaughter. As they disappeared around the corner, the hush in the terminal broke into hushed murmurs, passengers shifting and whispering, their eyes wide as they tried to piece together what had just happened. Zara let out a shuddering breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her father finally turned fully to her, his hand landing heavy and reassuring on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said, voice low so only she could hear. She nodded, blinking hard to keep the tears at bay, her throat raw with all the things she wanted to say but couldn't yet form into words. He didn't push her to speak, just squeezed her shoulder gently before guiding her back down the jet bridge. Outside in the terminal, the airline's PR team had materialized seemingly out of thin air, sleek suits and polished smiles, faltering as they read the scene in front of them. One of them, a young man with a tablet, hurried forward, pale and sweating. "Sir, we're preparing a statement," he stammered. Mr. Bennett didn't slow his stride but spared him a single withering glance. "Make sure it's honest," he snapped. The man nodded so hard his hair flopped, tapping frantically on his screen. As they walked past the boarding gate, Zara heard the PA system crackle to life overhead, the intercom voice shaking just slightly as it read the words it had been given. Ladies and gentlemen, Skylux Airlines would like to address the incident that occurred at Gate 12 today. A hush fell over the terminal. Phones lifted immediately, fingers hovering over record. The voice continued, forced and apologetic. We offer our sincerest apologies for the unacceptable treatment of one of our valued passengers, MS. Zara Bennett. Zara flinched at hearing her name broadcast, but didn't stop walking, her father's hand firm on her shoulder, guiding her forward. This airline does not and will not tolerate discrimination in any form, the voice went on, cracking at the edges under the weight of corporate shame. Effective immediately. We are enacting a new anti-discrimination policy and mandatory retraining for all customer-facing staff. A ripple of gasps and murmurs spread through the terminal. Passengers exchanging wide-eyed looks as the words sank in. Phones were held higher now, capturing every syllable. The voice wavered but pressed on. We deeply regret the pain caused and are committed to ensuring every passenger feels safe and respected while flying with us. Zara closed her eyes for a moment, the words hitting her with a strange, hollow weight, part vindication, part exhaustion. The apology wasn't for her. Not really. It was for the cameras, for the brand, for the headlines. But it was still something. It was proof that they couldn't pretend it hadn't happened, that they couldn't bury her like so much bad PR. She felt her father's hand squeeze her shoulder once more, grounding her, steadying her. She opened her eyes and kept walking, past the gate door, past the gawking crowd, toward the promise of something that felt like justice finally, belatedly catching up to the cruelty she'd been forced to endure. Months later, the news cycle had churned past the scandal, but the impact remained like a scar etched into the airline's reputation. The training programs had rolled out in every terminal, new posters plastered on walls declaring zero tolerance for discrimination, employees forced to sit through long sessions on bias, empathy, and customer care that left them pale and quiet as they filed out. The apology videos played in waiting areas with carefully edited sincerity, but in a small community center on the outskirts of the city. The real work was happening in silence without cameras or corporate scripts. Claudia Harper sat in a mismatched chair in a bright room decorated with crayon drawings and faded motivational posters, her crisp uniform gone, replaced by jeans and a loose cardigan that made her feel both exposed and oddly human. Her hair was pulled back messily, wisps framing her face in a way she would have hated before. She glanced at the group of girls in front of her, a mix of ages and backgrounds. They sat cross-legged on the floor, their eyes wide with curiosity and wariness. She took a shaky breath, fingers fidgeting with a folded paper in her lap. Her voice caught once, but she forced it steady. "I used to work at the airport," she said quietly, the words tasting like ash. A girl with braids raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Were you the nice kind of worker?" she asked boldly. The others giggled and Claudia winced, pressing her lips together before nodding slowly. "No," she admitted, voice rough. "I wasn't nice at all." The room fell silent, the truth so heavy it stilled even the giggles. Claudia shifted, forcing herself not to look away. "I thought it was my job to keep things professional," she continued, making air quotes with a bitter twist of her mouth. "But really, I just wanted to feel like I was in control." She let that sink in, the words hanging awkwardly in the air. One of the older girls cleared her throat. "Why?" she asked bluntly. Claudia's eyes burned as she looked at her. "Because I was scared," she confessed. The girls frowned in confusion, and she smiled sadly. "Scared of people I didn't understand, scared of change, scared of losing the tiny bit of power I had." She glanced around the room. "And when I got scared, I hurt people." A hush fell. A small voice piped up from the back. "Did you say sorry?" Claudia blinked hard, her throat tight. "I'm trying," she said honestly. "Every day." She reached for the paper in her lap, unfolding it with trembling fingers. The girls watched, leaning forward. "This is a letter," she said, her voice cracking. "To someone I hurt more than anyone." She inhaled shakily, eyes scanning the words she'd written and rewritten until the ink had smudged. "Dear Zara," she began, her voice soft but carrying in the silent room. "I don't expect you to forgive me, and no, I don't deserve it, but I need you to know that I am sorry." Her eyes blurred with tears she didn't bother to wipe. "I was cruel to you because I thought I was better. I thought my uniform made me important, but all it did was make me blind." She swallowed hard, the girls watching with wide, solemn eyes. "I didn't see you as a person. I saw you as a problem to be removed." She forced a breath, voice shaking. I watched you cry and I felt nothing, and that emptiness in me scared me more than anything else." She paused, the paper rattling in her hands. "You didn't deserve what I did to you. You didn't deserve the humiliation or the pain. You were brave in a way I didn't understand, standing up to me even when I held all the power." The girl sat rapt, no one daring to speak. Claudia's voice broke fully then, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, "for making me see what I had become, for forcing me to face it even though it cost you so much." She blinked hard, reading the last line. "I promise I will do better every single day and teach others to be better too." She let the paper fall into her lap, covering her face with both hands as the room went silent except for her quiet, ragged breathing. One of the older girls hesitated before getting up and walking over. She placed a small hand on Claudia's shoulder, squeezing gently. Claudia lowered her hands, meeting the girl's big, solemn eyes. The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "It's good to say sorry," she said. Claudia let out a broken laugh that turned into another sob, nodding quickly. "Yeah," she rasped, voice cracking. "It is." The rest of the group slowly drifted closer, some hugging her, others patting her back. The counselor in the corner watched quietly, a small smile on her face as she let the moment breathe. Outside the window, the city kept moving, cars honking, people bustling to their appointments, oblivious to the small, raw miracle unfolding in the room. Claudia wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve, sniffing hard. "Okay," she managed, voice steadier. "Let's talk about you." The girls settled back, curiosity restored, some smiling shyly now, as they began to share stories of feeling left out, feeling small, of times they'd said cruel things just to fit in. Claudia listened, really listened, nodding, offering the small words she wished she'd heard sooner. The sun shifted through the dirty glass, painting their faces in gold. And in that cramped, worn-out room, something like healing began to take root. Weeks later, in a quiet apartment, Zara sat on her bed, a stack of mail beside her, bills and flyers she'd ignored for days. She sighed, pulling the rubber band off the pile. A small white envelope fell onto her lap, no return address, but the handwriting was unfamiliar and careful. She frowned, tearing it open, eyes scanning the words inside. As she read, her breath hitched, her fingers trembling slightly, the apology plain and unvarnished, the words humble in a way that felt alien to her memory of Claudia's sneer. Her mouth pressed into a tight line, emotions battling behind her eyes. She inhaled slowly, the weight of it settling in her chest. She read it again, slower this time, her thumb brushing over the ink where it had smudged from tears she guessed hadn't been her own. She didn't smile, but her shoulders lowered, the tightness in her chest easing a fraction. She set the letter aside, fingers lingering on the paper, and for the first time in months, she felt something like possibility bloom in the quiet, fragile space between anger and forgiveness. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next one. I'd love to hear what you think. What part of Zara's journey struck you the most? Which moment made you feel angry, relieved, or even hopeful? And tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about it.